They called her too sensitive. They said the battlefield demanded ice, not emotion. They saw her, Specialist Irena Volkov, a European rifleman fresh out of the academy, and assigned her to the motor pool. Her mission? Counting tires. But Irena wasn't counting tires. She was counting meters. 3,847. She knew the physics of every gust of wind, the drop of every bullet, the tremor of every heartbeat, her own included. Because when the line broke, and a life hung on a single, impossible trigger pull, they realized the person they kept on the sidelines was the only one who could see the finish line. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out, subscribe now for more. The forward operating post, codenamed Citadel, hummed beneath the bright, relentless sun of the coastal desert. For Specialist Irena Volkov, the heat was merely another variable to factor in, a steady enemy she had grown used to. She was 23, with a keen, almost melancholic set of blue eyes that seemed to absorb the vastness of the empty sky. She hailed from a quiet region near the frigid northern mountains, a fact the other soldiers used to explain her overly serious demeanor and her occasional, intensely emotional reactions to stressful simulations. Irena was not a sniper. She was a combat logistics specialist. Her quarters were a clean, Spartan corner of the supply hangar, and her daily rhythm was one of meticulous counting. Every morning at 0700, the unit assembled for the operations briefing. The room was always filled with the charged energy of tactical readiness, maps, satellite feeds, and the loud, confident voices of the reconnaissance and marksman teams. Irena, barely 5'3" and slight of build, took her usual place against the back wall, clipboard in hand. The unit's commander, Major Alistair Thorne, a former ranger known for his brusque efficiency, stood at the front. "Today's priority is Operation Falcon's Eye," Thorne announced, his voice echoing with authority. "We have a critical observation post compromised in Sector Gamma. I need my sharpest eyes and steadiest hands on the bird. Lieutenant Davies, your lead spotter. Sergeant Polanco, you have the DMR. We need precision, people. Zero margin for error." As the names were called, the pilots, the security detail, the designated marksman, Irena's pen hovered over her notepad. She'd spent her nights running complex ballistic calculations in her head, mentally adjusting for wind shear and Coriolis effect on every known position in Sector Gamma. Her test scores in advanced marksmanship were consistently in the top percentile, but her assignment never changed. "Volkov," Major Thorne called out, his eyes briefly sweeping over her before landing on a stack of clipboards. "You're responsible for ammunition manifest. Double-check the caliber counts for the returning units. Ensure nothing is misplaced. Ammunition manifest." Again. Irena nodded sharply, the movement a purely mechanical response to a long-established disappointment. Around her, the selected team members exchanged fist bumps and tight, focused nods. To them, Irena was a ghost, the small woman who knew the serial number of every rifle but was never trusted to fire one. She heard the whispers as the group dispersed. "Thank goodness Volkov's not on the line today. She gets so tight when the pressure is on." Another replied, "It's not just the nerves, it's the optics. She's too slight for heavy recoil, and you can't have a sniper getting choked up on a high-stakes shot. We need granite, not tears." Irena didn't correct them. Her emotions weren't a weakness, they were a catalyst. She felt the immense weight of every life, every consequence, and that weight made her preparation absolute. Her mind was a human calculator, storing and processing environmental data that the standard-issue ballistic computers often ignored. They saw her nervousness, they didn't see the thousands of micro-adjustments she could make before her finger even touched the trigger. As the operations team geared up, Irena walked to the heavy weapons lockup. She completed her assigned manifest, counting and verifying dozens of different ammo types. Tucked away beneath the regulation ledger was her personal atmospheric compendium, a hand-bound journal filled with highly localized wind patterns, elevation profiles, and thermal variations for every high ridge within a 50-kilometer radius of the Citadel. No one asked her to study the environment in this detail. No one knew she even possessed it. But Irena knew that true competence meant being ready for the mission the manual didn't cover. The following 2 weeks saw Irena continue her double life. By day, she managed the meticulously organized chaos of the armory, logging every crate and caliber with unnatural precision. By night, she moved her operations to the base's small and used long-range practice bay. Here, she wasn't limited by her logistics role. She used her off hours to perfect her control over the heaviest caliber rifles, specifically the Barrett M82, a 1.50 caliber anti-material rifle. The standard protocol dictated only the largest, most physically imposing soldiers train with the rifle to manage its devastating recoil. Irena, through sheer, isolated effort and specialized bracing techniques, had mastered it. Her proficiency, however, was about to become a problem. The rumors began subtly. First, it was the range master, Chief Warrant Officer Reyes, who questioned her. Specialist Volkov, Reyes asked during a routine inspection, tapping her clipboard with a skeptical finger. Your supply requisitions show an unusually high amount of low-yield, hyper-specific blank rounds for the heavy-caliber rifles. That's well outside your unit's standard training scope. Irena explained that she was preparing for a base-wide hypothetical defense scenario which required testing the structural limits of certain targets. Reyes accepted the answer but planted a seed of doubt that quickly grew. Soon, her dedication to situational awareness was twisted into something suspicious. During a tactical review focused on potential infiltration points, Irena, who had mentally mapped every kilometer of the surrounding ridges, offered a suggestion regarding a little-known, wind-sheltered ravine that could be used for silent approach. Sergeant Thompson, the lead marksman, cut her off with a patronizing chuckle. That's a nice logistical thought, Volkov, but we're talking about operations here. Focus on the gear, not the gunfights. You spend too much time in the scope, I hear. The whispers intensified. She's obsessed with the big rifle, she's looking for glory, that European one is too volatile. 1 minute she's crying over a lost supply key, the next she's talking about precision shots at 3 kilometers. Her emotionality, which was merely intense focus, was being weaponized against her. The command saw her passion as instability. The isolation became complete when Major Thorne called her into his office for a clarification of roles. Irena sat across a desk cluttered with mission reports, and her detailed, self-generated atmospheric compendium, which had somehow been acquired. Volkov, you are arguably the best logistics specialist I've had, Major Thorne began, his expression severe. Your inventory is flawless. But your activity beyond your defined role is a liability. Sir, I am trying to be the most prepared soldier I can be, Irena stated, her voice tight. The knowledge of terrain and ballistics makes me better at anticipating supply needs and mission readiness. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes locked on the compendium. It makes you look like a sniper who can't handle rejection, Specialist. You are studying operational details you are not cleared, trained, or frankly, emotionally suited for. This is creating questions about your judgment and commitment to your role. I need you to destroy this journal and focus solely on your manifest. Is that understood? Irena felt the familiar, cold pit in her stomach. Her effort, her competence, was being categorized as a character defect. She stood, her spine rigid. Understood, Major, she replied. She collected the compendium and walked out, not to destroy it, but to hide it deeper. She knew the moment would come when the digital systems would fail and the granite-nerved men would be paralyzed. And when that moment arrived, her supposed emotional volatility and inappropriate preparation would be the only thing left to save them. The dismissal by Major Thorne didn't crush Irena, it solidified her resolve. The official rejection of her analytical skill as a character defect only confirmed her belief that she could trust her own judgment and nobody else's. She understood the psychology of her command. In a high-stress, male-dominated environment, emotion was seen as a lack of control, and control was the foundation of their order. To them, she was a liability because she felt too much. But to Irena, feeling the full weight of potential failure was the only way to achieve absolute success. She carefully moved her atmospheric compendium from her locker to a secure, hidden compartment beneath a floor panel in the least used corner of the armory, a spot no one would bother to check because the inventory logs, thanks to her meticulous work, never showed a discrepancy there. Her preparation deepened, becoming a silent, all-consuming ritual. Since the base would not allow her to train with the Barrett .50 under official supervision, she found creative ways to continue her mastery in absolute secrecy. She couldn't fire live rounds, but she could practice dry firing the massive rifle for hours, focusing on the minute muscle groups required to perfectly absorb and counter the theoretical recoil. She began using specialized, high-mass equipment, weights and heavy tools, in the motor pool after hours to simulate the physical handling of the rifle, claiming she was training for heavy equipment load-bearing tasks. Crucially, she began to focus her study on the non-military infrastructure around the Citadel. The base relied heavily on a recently installed digital communications relay on Ridge Alpha, a state-of-the-art system designed for rapid encryption and transmission. Irena, however, studied its vulnerabilities. She cross-referenced its technical specifications with reports of enemy anti-technology capabilities, specifically their rumored ability to launch electromagnetic attacks. Nobody asked her to do this. They were confident in the digital system's stated redundancies. But Irena learned a valuable lesson from her background in complex physics: every system has a single point of failure. She researched and memorized the location of the base's obsolete, physical analog radio station, which was kept in a forgotten bunker and only used for quarterly drills. If the digital world went dark, that old radio would be the only way to communicate. Her isolation was most acutely felt during mess hall dinners. Her friend Laura, another logistics specialist, started avoiding her, scared off by the official scrutiny. "Irena, you need to be careful," Laura whispered once, quickly glancing at Major Thorne's table. "They think you're challenging the chain of command. Just stick to the ledgers, it's safer." Irena merely nodded, but she knew safety wasn't her goal. Survival was. And survival, in her line of work, meant being the only one who had prepared for the worst-case scenario. She continued to watch the weather feeds, the subtle thermal shifts, and the high-altitude jet streams, collecting the granular data that would make the difference between a shot being possible and a shot being perfect. She was building a library of data that existed outside the official command structure, an arsenal of knowledge she knew they would one day desperately need. The core problem for Irena was the Barrett M82A1 itself. The unit owned several, but they were kept under strict physical and digital lock and key, reserved only for anti-material targets too robust for smaller calibers. Irena couldn't train with it, but she needed to be ready to use it. She decided she needed more than just theoretical knowledge, she needed physical access to its inner workings without raising any alarm. She initiated a meticulously planned project using her role as the logistics specialist. She began by requisitioning a series of obscure, high-precision tools and calibration gauges, classifying them under armory maintenance and scope recalibration for the entire unit. She spent weeks meticulously mapping the digital access code sequence required to open the Barrett locker, observing the chief warrant officer's routine during his checks. She realized the digital lock, while sophisticated, had a brief, predictable vulnerability during its nightly automatic system reboot. Her next move was to acquire a steady supply of the specialized .50 caliber rounds required for extreme long-range shooting, rounds the base only stocked in small quantities for emergency use. She managed this by slightly adjusting the inventory counts for several smaller, more common calibers, creating a minuscule budget surplus on her ledger. She then used this surplus to quietly order the required high-precision rounds, tagging them on the digital manifest as specialized counter-material training samples that would be stored off-site. In reality, she stored them in her own hidden compartment, carefully verifying their exact weight, propellant load, and ballistic coefficient against her manual calculations. This was the clearest act of insubordination yet, not just studying outside her scope, but manipulating the supply chain to build her own shadow arsenal. The risk of court-martial was now very real. Her isolation now served as her camouflage. No one was watching the logistics specialist because she was seen as too small and too emotional to be a threat. They watched the shooters, they didn't watch the accountant. Her emotionality was the perfect screen for her cold, precise acts of subversion. Irena also focused on the terminal point, the optimal firing position. She spent several off-duty hours hiking the surrounding ridges, not just to map the terrain, as she had done for her compendium, but to identify the single point that offered the best line of sight to the most crucial and exposed enemy positions. She settled on Observation Post 7, OP7, a forgotten, exposed bunker on a high ridge that was used only as a passive sensor station and never as a firing position because of its extreme exposure to wind shear. She mentally recorded every approach, every sight line, and every angle of repose she would need to stabilize the massive rifle. She was no longer just preparing, she was creating the conditions for her own intervention, knowing that when the emergency came, she would be the only one equipped, both mathematically and physically, to step into the void left by the failure of their conventional doctrine. The morning started bright and clear, the kind of day that bred complacency. The air was dry, and the sun beat down on the Citadel, promising high thermal instability, a nightmare for long-range shooters, as heat causes the air to shimmer, distorting the bullet's path. Irena was in the armory, performing her final routine check. She paused at the Barrett locker, looking at the massive rifle resting in its cradle. She had mentally fired it thousands of times, and her hands still remembered the exact grip pressure and cheek weld required for a perfect shot. Major Thorne walked into the armory, clipboard in hand, accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel Varus, a senior officer from the regional command inspecting the base's readiness. Major Thorne, Varus stated, his voice professional and cool. I'm concerned by the recent reports regarding the disciplinary issues with Specialist Volkov. Your report states she's technically excellent but exhibits an unhealthy focus on duties outside her scope. I need assurance that your command can maintain order, especially with your most volatile personnel. Thorne glanced at Irena, who was focused on organizing cleaning supplies. Colonel, Specialist Volkov is on strict notice. She has been confined to inventory duty. Her compendium has been officially flagged. Her conduct has been professional since the last warning. Good, Varus replied, looking dismissively at Irena. We can't have emotional instability near our heaviest weapons. The meter engagement is our maximum reliable range, and we need granite in the field. Not. He paused, searching for the right word, not passion. Irena continued working, seemingly oblivious, but the words were a direct hit. She finished her task, then walked over to the supply requisition terminal. She initiated one final, subtle action that only her eyes would recognize, a request for a foot length of specialized, dense polyethylene foam, classifying it as heavy equipment padding. This foam was non-standard, but she knew it was the perfect material for creating an improvised, high-density recoil buffer, a necessary aid for a small-framed person to handle the Barrett's brutal kick without losing sight alignment. As she signed the digital request, she felt the faint, distant hum of the comms relay on Ridge Alpha. She checked her personal, hidden radio, which monitored non-secure frequencies. The chatter was normal, complacent. She finished her day, her mind an ocean of calm beneath a surface of routine. Every piece was in place, the hidden ammunition, the memorized access codes, the perfectly mapped firing position at OP7, and the knowledge that she was the only one who truly understood the meter gap in the unit's operational knowledge. She knew the moment was coming. In an environment built on rigid order, it only took one unexpected variable, a storm, a system glitch, an extreme threat, to expose the critical flaw. They were ready for the expected fight, but not the impossible one. And the impossible one was the only one she was equipped to win. Irena performed her final, mandatory check of the unit's inventory logs before retiring to her quarters. The air in the base felt tight, charged with an unspoken nervousness about the security inspection by Lieutenant Colonel Varus. As she passed the main briefing tent, she overheard a conversation that extinguished any remaining hope that her competence might speak for itself. Sergeant Thompson and another senior marksman, Private Hayes, were discussing the day's readiness review. Did you see Volkov's face when Varus was talking about emotional instability? Hayes muttered. She went completely pale. You know, she's too fragile for this work. She might be good at counting screws, but put her under enemy fire and she'll crack. Thompson replied, a hint of his old condescension returning. It's the genetics, I guess. She can run, sure, but the physical requirement for the high-impact stuff is beyond her. Look, if I'm pinned down at 2 kilometers, I want Polanco covering me. His heart rate doesn't jump over 60. I don't want someone who might cry and miss because they feel the pressure too much. Hayes laughed, low and harsh. Exactly. She belongs in an office, not near the big rifles. Imagine her firing the .50, she'd fly off the firing line. The words were a physical blow, yet they solidified Irena's path. Cry and miss. They had reduced her entire, meticulous preparation, her scientific precision, her unwavering dedication to the most difficult mathematics of her trade, to a cartoon of frailty. They saw a woman, she saw a weapon. They saw emotion, she saw focused power. She walked on, no longer angry, but absolutely certain. She was not preparing to prove them wrong, she was preparing to save them. That night, she spent 2 hours in her quarters, not studying her compendium, but mentally rehearsing the protocol for a full comms blackout. She visualized the fastest route to the analog radio station, the codes for the Barrett locker, and the most efficient path to OP7. She then performed a series of core exercises designed to strengthen the precise muscles needed for recoil management, pushing herself until her body was screaming in controlled exhaustion. She checked her personal radio one last time. Everything was quiet. Irena closed her eyes, letting her consciousness drift across the vast, empty desert terrain outside the base perimeter. She pictured Ridge Alpha, meters away, and the subtle, invisible currents of air that flowed between her and that distant target. She saw the problem, the wind, the drop, the enemy, as a single, beautiful mathematical equation that only she was prepared to solve. She slept with the silent, absolute confidence that her moment was only a matter of time. The clear, sunny morning dissolved at 11:17 with a sound that felt more like a physical blow than an alarm. It wasn't the air raid siren, which was loud and mournful, it was the unstable frequency stutter of the primary communications relay failing. Irena was in the armory, logging a shipment of optical scopes, when the digital inventory screen went black. Her heart hammered, not with fear, but with a surge of adrenaline she had prepared for. She dropped the clipboard and sprinted toward the operations command hub. The room was a maelstrom of confusion. Major Thorne was shouting into a dead handset. The main digital map, usually a vibrant tapestry of real-time intelligence, displayed only a black screen and a blinking error code. What is the status of the comms? Thorne bellowed. Sir, system failure across the northern sector, or radio tech reported, voice shaking. We've lost contact with Outpost Delta 9 and the accompanying engineering unit, codenamed Hammersmith. We have fragmented chatter, reports of a coordinated anti-technology electromagnetic attack that fried our primary uplink. Outpost Delta 9. Irena knew that position intimately. It was perched on the highest, most exposed ridge in the region, a position that demanded both high-tech comms and perfect situational awareness. If their comms were down, they were blind and isolated. And Hammersmith, the engineering unit, was likely stranded. Pull up the physical blueprints. Get a runner to the secure analog station. Thorne ordered, trying to regain control. Irena pushed through the huddled personnel, her small frame going unnoticed until she reached the central command table. The major was staring at a blank screen, his face grim. Sir, Irena said, her voice cutting through the panic, calm and low. Outpost Delta 9 is critically exposed. If the enemy used an EMP, they'll follow it immediately with a long-range kinetic strike. They need immediate, precise cover fire to allow any remaining personnel to retreat to the secondary trench lines. Thorne finally looked at her, irritation momentarily overriding his stress. Volkov, get back to the armory. This is an operational crisis, not a supply issue. The standard marksman cannot acquire the target, Irena pressed on, ignoring the dismissal. The effective range to provide suppression from the Citadel is 2,000 meters. Their longest effective DMRs won't penetrate the heavy cover at that distance, sir. We need the Barrett .50. She waited, her breath held. The command staff looked at her, the logistics specialist, standing there, advocating for the Barrett M8201 anti-material rifle, a weapon she wasn't authorized to touch. Major Thorne waved her away. Sergeant Thompson. Prep your spotter and the long-range rifle. Give me eyes on Sector Delta 9, now. Sergeant Thompson, the lead marksman, responded with a shake of his head. Negative, Major. We ran the calcs this morning. The wind shear at 2,000 meters is extreme today. Even with the .338 Lapua, our maximum reliable engagement range is meters. If they're under heavy fire, a miss is worse than no shot. The radio tech suddenly gasped. Sir, we have a short burst emergency uplink. The enemy is massing on the approach road to Delta 9. They are bringing heavy weapons. And they have pinned the Hammersmith unit. They're trapped between the attack force and an unstable cliff face. The map blinked back to life for a split second, showing the horrifying reality. The Hammersmith engineering unit was trapped meters away, according to the last GPS ping. They were a sitting duck, far beyond the reach of any conventionally effective weapon system in the Citadel's armory. Call for air support. Thorne roared. Sir, all air assets are grounded pending communication restoration, the pilot replied, desperation in his voice. We're blind and deaf in that sector. Thorne looked at the numbers, meters. It was a range only achievable in training films, certainly not in the field with unreliable wind conditions. He looked at Thompson, who grimly shook his head. It's impossible, sir. The projectile drop at that range is over meters. We don't have the data, or the rifle, for that. Irena stepped forward again, holding her gaze steady on Thorne. Sir, I have the data. I have every single thermal profile, every wind factor, and every required minute of angle adjustment for the Barrett .50 to hit that precise location. The required kill zone is an exposed enemy heavy mortar position on Ridge Alpha, which is threatening the Hammersmith unit's escape route. Thorne leaned close, his voice dangerously low. Volkov, that's almost 4 kilometers. The Barrett is an anti-material rifle, not a precision weapon at that distance. And I told you, you are not a shooter. I won't risk lives on the whim of a logistics specialist. The commander's dismissal was the final push Irena needed. She realized no amount of begging, pleading, or logical argument would change the deep-seated prejudice against her. The men would wait for the impossible, air support or comms restoration, while Hammersmith was executed meters away. Irena executed her own plan. She turned her back on the command center chaos and walked directly, calmly, to the heavy weapons lockup. Chief Warrant Officer Reyes was guarding the entrance, distracted by the frantic radio traffic. Specialist Volkov. I thought the Major told you, Reyes started. Irena didn't stop. She reached into her utility vest, pulled out a non-standard magnetic key card she had meticulously crafted months ago, using spare parts from the scrap heap, and swiped it across the Barrett's secure rack. The lock clicked open. What are you doing with the Barrett .50, Specialist? Reyes demanded, his eyes wide in disbelief. That is absolutely unauthorized. I'm securing the only weapon capable of providing long-range cover, Irena stated, her voice steady. She grabbed the massive rifle, the weight settling perfectly into the muscle memory she had built in isolation. She slung the weapon, picked up the dedicated heavy-caliber field pack, and turned toward the perimeter fence. Reyes reached for her arm, torn between protocol and the desperate nature of the crisis. Volkov, stop. This is insubordination. You'll be court-martialed. Irena looked at him, her intense blue eyes shining, but totally dry. Court-martialed for saving a unit, Chief? Or for watching them die while we argued over regulations? She didn't wait for his answer. She activated the perimeter gate's manual bypass, a complex combination lock she'd documented in her compendium, and slipped through the barrier. Her destination was Observation Post 7, OP7, a desolate, exposed concrete bunker on the base's highest ridge, the only point with the line of sight and elevation required for a shot this extreme. It was a minute run across open, uneven ground, carrying the weight of the rifle and its specialized ammunition. Irena reached OP-7 breathless, but not panicked. The physical exhaustion only served to sharpen her mind. She deployed the Barrett, mounting it onto the custom tripod she had requisitioned under the guise of testing heavy equipment stability. She threw herself behind the rifle, her mind entering the precise, almost meditative state she had practiced hundreds of times. She pulled her atmospheric compendium from her pack and opened it to the page labeled Ridge Alpha Thermal Deviation. Her scope was completely unusable for a target so far away. The enemy mortar position was a tiny, indistinct blur. She had to rely on a different optic, a commercial-grade, ultra-long-range thermal camera she had modified and secretly installed in OP-7 weeks ago. The enemy mortar team, oblivious to the threat almost 4 kilometers away, was setting up for their final, devastating volley against the pinned Hammersmith unit. Irena began making her adjustments. The target was meters away, requiring clicks of vertical adjustment, a drop compensation of nearly meters. A severe crosswind blowing from the left required meters of horizontal lead. She factored in the rotation of the Earth, a factor only relevant at ranges exceeding meters, demanding a tiny, precise correction. She felt the tremor of her own emotion, the fear, the anxiety, the anger, but instead of fighting it, she channeled it. She let the intense focus on the weight of the moment make her hold absolutely still. She found her breathing rhythm, took a deep breath, let half of it out, and held. In the command hub, Major Thorne was now frantically listening to Reyes. "Sir, Volkov has taken the Barrett and is heading for OP-7. She's attempting the long shot. She's going to miss. She'll alert the entire sector." Thorne shouted, running toward the analog radio to stop her. Irena's finger was on the trigger. Her sight picture was blurred, but her calculation was complete. She took the last moment to whisper to herself, in her native language, a small, fierce affirmation. Visual, slow-motion shot of the Barrett firing. The massive rifle recoils violently, but Irena holds the line. The heavy-caliber round leaves the barrel, traveling silently, impossibly, toward the distant ridge. Then, over the fading sound of the shot, a new report reached the command hub, Delta 9. The enemy mortar team is down. A direct, one-shot hit on their position. They're scattering. We're clear to move. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. Back at the Citadel command hub, Major Thorne stood frozen by the radio, the silence of the room heavier than the earlier chaos. Outpost Delta 9 had reported a successful extraction of the Hammersmith unit, citing a miraculous, single, high-caliber shot that neutralized the threat. Thorne turned to Chief Warrant Officer Reyes, who was staring wide-eyed at the empty Barrett rack. "Did she just, at meters?" Reyes, still reeling, nodded slowly. "The last GPS from Hammersmith confirms the distance, Major. She achieved what our entire marksman program declared impossible." The disbelief quickly curdled into a mix of anger and awe. Irena returned to the base 15 minutes later, silent and focused. She approached the armory, carefully cleaned the massive rifle, and returned it to its rack before the security system could be reset. She placed the worn, half-empty box of specialized ammunition on the counter, her eyes meeting Reyes's. "Ammunition manifest is updated, Chief," she said, her voice dry. "1 round expended. Target neutralized." She then walked directly to Major Thorne, who was waiting for her on the tarmac, surrounded by the shaken and bewildered members of the marksman team, including Sergeant Thompson. "Volkov," Thorne began, his tone a dangerous mix of fury and respect. "You committed gross insubordination. You ignored a direct order, violated base security, and risked the lives of every unit here by taking an unauthorized shot that could have given away our position to the entire hostile sector. Do you understand the gravity of that?" "Yes, sir," Irena replied, her posture perfect. And yet, you saved the Hammersmith unit, Thorne conceded, the admission clearly painful. How? How did a logistics specialist achieve a long-distance shot that the finest marksman in this unit declared impossible? Irena pulled the atmospheric compendium from her pack and placed the worn journal on the ground. I didn't rely on the standard meter rule, sir. I relied on physics. I calculated the exact minute of angle compensation for today's temperature, elevation change, cross-range wind vector, and the rotation of the Earth. I was prepared, sir. I was simply waiting for the moment when my preparation became necessary. Irena was immediately confined to her quarters pending a formal investigation, an outcome she had fully anticipated. The following morning, she faced a tribunal consisting of Major Thorne and a visiting adjutant colonel from Regional Command, a stiff, formal officer named Colonel Vesper. The colonel's opening remarks were cold and focused on procedure. Specialist Volkov, your service record is technically excellent, but there are recurring notes regarding emotional volatility and inappropriate ambition. Let's address the most immediate concern: you stole a classified weapon and disobeyed a direct command. Why should we not recommend a dishonorable discharge? Sir, I saved a unit who were meters away and under imminent threat of mortar fire, Irena stated calmly. My action, though irregular, was the only viable kinetic solution at the time. Colonel Vesper opened Irena's file. You are noted for over-preparing and being emotionally susceptible during simulations. Major Thorne specifically reported your unauthorized study of ballistics as potential insubordination. The argument here is not whether you could hit the target, but whether your judgment is sound enough to decide when to break protocol. My judgment was informed by data, sir, Irena countered. My emotional susceptibility is simply the deep investment I make in every life. That intensity drives my calculations to be more precise than those who rely solely on digital systems. The target was acquired and neutralized because I accounted for the failure of both the comms system and the conventional engagement doctrine. My focus is not a flaw, it's a high-precision operating system that runs when the standard-issue models crash. Sergeant Thompson was brought in to testify. He looked at Irena, his previous condescension replaced by an uncomfortable deference. Sergeant, would your team have taken that shot? Colonel Vesper asked. No, sir, Thompson admitted, his voice low. The shot was beyond our scope. We didn't have the data, or frankly, the focus to manage the atmospheric factors at that range. The colonel turned back to Irena. So you admit that your unauthorized actions were based on skills acquired through direct disobedience of your commander's order to scale back your focus? I admit my actions were based on absolute readiness, Irena corrected firmly. I prepared for the needs of the mission, not the limits of my job title. The hearing was recessed. Irena returned to her barracks to await the decision, unsure if she would be celebrated or imprisoned. Later that evening, Major Thorne found her. He didn't look angry, he looked exhausted and deeply reflective. Irena, he said, using her first name for the first time. I've just spent 2 hours on the secure line with Regional Command. They ran a deep analysis of your shot. The sheer mathematics of the correction you made for the Coriolis effect, it was flawless. It's a shot that will enter the record books. It's the longest recorded hostile engagement in the history of this unit. Irena merely nodded, waiting for the punishment. They want to know why you felt the need to train on the Barrett in the first place, Thorne continued, rubbing his temples. Why didn't you just ask for a transfer to marksman team if your skills were this advanced? Sir, I did ask. Repeatedly, Irena stated. I was told I was too small, too emotional, and too valuable to logistics to be risked on operations. So, I prepared in silence. I proved that the emotional weight of consequence can be a force multiplier, not a deficit. Thorne looked at her, finally seeing past the small stature and the sensitive demeanor to the absolute steel beneath. Colonel Vesper's final decision is severe, Volkov. You will receive a formal reprimand for your gross violation of protocol. But that reprimand will be immediately followed by a promotion. He took a breath. Effective immediately, Specialist Irena Volkov, you are reassigned. You will report to the newly established Strategic Reconnaissance and Extreme Distance Unit, as the lead ballistic consultant and designated marksman. You have been given a meter kill record, Specialist. We're going to put that skill to use. Proceed with 14, then long part 15, final. Make sure that each part has 500 words only. For the last part, add CTA up next. You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us. This is the final segment of the script, bringing Irena's story to its powerful conclusion. The promotion sent a shockwave through the Citadel. The command structure had officially penalized Irena for insubordination but immediately rewarded her with a mission-critical role, effectively creating a new unit around her unique, unauthorized skill set. The message was clear: protocol matters, but saving lives matters more. Irena was given a small, secure area near the command hub, designated the Ballistic Analysis Center. She sat at a new workstation, surrounded not by inventory clipboards, but by multiple large-screen displays showing real-time atmospheric data feeds. Her first official duty was not to count equipment, but to calibrate the entire base's long-range optics using the mathematical model she had developed in her compendium. The shift in how her peers treated her was palpable. Sergeant Thompson, once her loudest critic, approached her station later that day. He didn't offer an apology, but something more meaningful: respect. Specialist Volkov, he began, awkwardly holding a damaged spotting scope. This scope's 0 is off. We thought it was fine, but after your shot, everything feels like it's out of alignment. Irena, now wearing the patch of her new unit, looked up. It's the thermal lens, she stated, not bothering to check the device. The micro-expansion rate at degrees Celsius is causing an angular distortion of milliradian past meters. It needs a manual, non-digital shim adjustment. The system can't account for it. Thompson stared, stunned by her instant diagnosis. You knew that just by looking at the model number? No, Irena replied simply. I knew it because I ran the manual calculations on that specific composite lens 6 months ago, during my off hours. Bring it back after the tech installs a titanium stabilizer. I've already requisitioned one. He left without another word, his perspective irrevocably altered. He had seen her dedication as a sign of instability, now he understood it as a guarantee of success. The biggest change came from Major Thorne. He held a private briefing with Irena, not as her judge, but as her operations partner. He handed her a large, personalized notebook, a leather-bound replacement for her now retired, heavily used atmospheric compendium. This is yours, Thorne said. Log every calculation. And here's the best part, you are now the final authority on all extreme distance engagement parameters. If your model overrides the system's prediction, we follow your model. You're our analog safety net. Irena accepted the notebook, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her professional facade. She had been assigned to the base to count tires. Now, her job was to define the absolute limit of possibility. Rena's new role quickly evolved into that of a legend within the Citadel, though the legend was a quiet, mathematical one. The command structure had attempted to contain her, but her 3,847-meter kill record, now officially logged, verified by forensic analysts, and studied by regional command, was an impossible fact that demanded not just recognition, but systemic change. Her promotion to Chief Specialist of Strategic Ballistic Analysis was a testament to the idea that expertise, often dismissed as obsession, will always be the ultimate metric of worth. She had forced the system to recognize that true strength isn't measured in mass, but in absolute control. The distance of 3,847 meters was no longer just a one-off miracle, it became the new, documented benchmark for the unit's long-range capabilities, entirely dependent on her proprietary calculations. Her emotionality, once cited as a reason for her inability to serve, was now recognized as the source of her profound focus. She cared too deeply about the consequences to allow for error, and that caring translated into flawless mathematics. She had effectively weaponized her own intensity. Her influence spread beyond the armory. Lieutenant Colonel Varys, who had so dismissively judged her, returned a month later, not to reprimand, but to personally oversee the implementation of her analytical methodology. He commissioned the installation of a new, non-networked analog computing station, a throwback to the older era, solely dedicated to running her complex, high-variable atmospheric models whenever the digital comms were threatened. Irena was now the custodian of the analog safety net, the unit's final defense against high-tech failure. The changes were most keenly felt by the marksman team. Sergeant Thompson and Private Hayes, who had mocked her frailty, were now required to spend 1 day a week with Irena, not for disciplinary reasons, but for retraining. Irena taught them how to read the terrain without relying on laser rangefinders. She showed them how the shimmer of heat off a distant rock face revealed subtle wind vortices, information that could not be gathered by any sensor. It was humbling work for men who prided themselves on their innate shooting skill, but they couldn't argue with the results. She didn't teach them how to shoot, she taught them how to calculate the atmosphere, a skill that was, in fact, far more dangerous. During the base's quarterly review ceremony, Major Thorne decided to use the opportunity to address the entire contingent about the true nature of military readiness. He stood before the assembled personnel, Irena and her Barrett .50 notebook at his side. "We operate on technology, and we rely on physical strength," Thorne began, his voice ringing with conviction. "But technology can fail, and sometimes, even the strongest soldier is simply too far away." We judged Specialist Volkov, now Chief Specialist Volkov, by the size of her frame and the intensity of her feelings. We limited her to counting equipment when she was secretly calculating the speed of the Earth's rotation. He continued, his gaze sharp. "We learned that the most important weapon in any unit is the absolute, isolated commitment to preparation that goes beyond the job description." Chief Volkov didn't take an impossible shot, she took a calculated shot. She was ready for the moment the manual didn't cover. She is the living proof that the measure of a soldier is not where you assign them, but what they secretly equip themselves to be. Thorne finished the address by formally presenting Irena with a customized plaque etched with the exact coordinates of Ridge Alpha and the number 3847, a permanent, physical reminder of the day she redefined the unit's limits. Irena accepted the plaque, her intense blue eyes shining, not with tears of sadness or triumph, but with the pure, fierce satisfaction of the scientist whose theory has been proven in the crucible of reality. She had entered the base as the emotional European girl who counted bullets, she left her mark as the soldier who defined the limit of long-range engagement. The record stood, a silent, indisputable testament that competence, meticulously prepared and fiercely delivered, will always overcome prejudice. The base had not just saved a unit that day, it had gained a new understanding of strength, proving that the most lethal weapon in the arsenal was not the Barrett .50, but the brilliant, fiercely focused mind of the woman who was finally trusted to fire it. Her legacy was not defined by the shot itself, but by the thousands of silent, obsessive calculations she performed when no one was watching. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.